Hi, Dr. Collins. I can't tell you what a joy and an honor it is to have you come and speak to the Jewish community today on the holiest day of our year.
Well, Rabbi, it's a privilege to be able to join you for this one Yom Kippur that you're putting together to reach out to people across the world at this very holy day at a very challenging time for our planet. I think it's wonderful.
Challenging. Thank you. And I want to just, you know, your accolades are beyond comparison, but I just wanted to introduce you properly to everyone who's joining us today, that it's just such an honor to welcome Dr. Francis Collins with us today to join not just the Jewish people, but everyone who is with us today on Yom Kippur. Dr. Collins is an American physician geneticist who discovered the genes associated with a number of diseases and led the Human Genome Project. He's the director of the National Institutes of Health, and he's also written a number of books on science, medicine, and on religion, including his New York Times bestseller, The Language of God. And he's working harder probably than anyone we know, and he's working right now harder than he has in his entire life to keep us safe and to help find a treatment and a cure to this horrific pandemic. And I mean, there's so many things I can read about you. You're the recipient of the Presidential Medal of Freedom, and I just want to thank you for your time. And I have so many questions to ask you, and I know your time is limited. So let me just ask away. And feel free to ask me anything if you have a question for me.
All right, I will do that, Rabbi. Please proceed.
Okay. And I just wanted to say my brother works for you. So I'm very proud of my brother, Dr. Daniel Levy, who's
and he's a wonderful contributor to medical research, somebody we're very fond of and very proud of. So I can see why you would be too.
I am. So I know that you're familiar with Einstein's famous quote about mystery that I just wanted to share a tiny bit about. He wrote, "The most beautiful emotion we can experience is the mysterious. It is the fundamental emotion that stands at the cradle of all true art and science. He to whom this emotion is a stranger, who can no longer wonder and stand wrapped in awe, is as good as dead, a snuffed out candle. To sense that behind anything that can be experienced, there's something that our minds cannot grasp, whose beauty and sublimity reaches us only indirectly. This is religiousness." And I just wanted to ask you, where do you see God's hand, and how does that awareness impact you as a scientist?
Well, I love the quote from Einstein, and your book about Einstein and the rabbi, I think, has touched a lot of people because they kind of assumed Einstein was going to be this nerdy guy who didn't really think about mystery, and clearly he did. And I do, as a scientist who's constantly amazed at what science can teach us about the natural world. I see that also as an opportunity to explore mysteries, maybe to uncover some answers, but usually it's like the layers of an onion. There are more mysteries that are yet to be discovered each time we go a little deeper. And that is what makes science so exhilarating when you're also a person of faith, because not only are you satisfying your intellectual curiosity, you have an opportunity to get a glimpse into the mind of the Creator. And I'm fond of saying, therefore, that science is not just an intellectual exercise. It's also an opportunity of worship, and that you can find God in the laboratory just like you can find God in the synagogue or the cathedral. Many scientists feel that way, many don't. For me, as somebody who's able to bring together the science and the spiritual worldviews, it makes both of them infinitely more inspiring and interesting.
I can't tell you how much you inspire me. I cannot begin to tell you. And as I said to you, I mentioned to you that we have a family friend who's really like a member of our family who has cystic fibrosis. And it moves me so much that she's a young woman, and you have changed her life. You personally have changed her life and the lives of so many millions of people around the globe. And I just, on Rosh Hashanah, we read from the Torah the famous story of Hagar and her son Ishmael lost in the desert. And the Torah says that they ran out of food and water, and she thinks they're going to die in the wilderness of starvation and thirst. And she lays her child down because she can't bear to see him die. And at that moment, the Torah says, and God opened her eyes, and she saw a well. And we're to take from that God did not place the well there. The miracle was simply, and God opened her eyes. And just taking off of what you just said about science, my hope, my prayer, my belief is that the cure to this pandemic, the treatment, the vaccine, it's already here. It's just waiting to be discovered. Does that speak to you in any way?
It does. I think what we need to figure out is how all of those materials that can lead to this prevention or a cure, they exist in the wonderful universe that God has given us. But we have to use the creative insights that God has also given us as a gift to understand that and to zero in on what is actually going to turn out to be the answer. You know, I know at Yom Kippur, it's traditional to read Psalm 27, which is also one of my favorite Psalms. And I couldn't help but notice as I looked at it, the last two verses seem to fit really well here. I am still confident of this, says the psalmist. I will see the goodness of the Lord in the land of the living. Wait for the Lord, be strong and take heart and wait for the Lord. Okay, everybody's waiting. And here's a promise. I will see the goodness of the Lord in the land of the living. That seems like a good couple of verses for where we are with COVID-19 on Yom Kippur.
That's so powerful and beautiful. And just the idea that God is our light, and we have to see the world through that light. I guess that brings me to another question, which is, in God's eyes, we're all children. We're all brothers and sisters. We're just one world. And we're seeing so much polarization, not just in our country, but all over the world. We're seeing so much polarization, just right now in our country, so much polarization. And what is the dream of unity, of us all seeing each other through God's eyes, in God's light? What does that dream look like for you?
It is certainly a dream, and certainly one that right now comes to mind because we seem to have slipped away from that sense of unity, particularly in the last many months. I'm a father. I think one of the things that gives me greatest joy is when my two daughters are having a close and friendly relationship, and when they are out of sorts with each other, which occasionally happens, that grieves me. And I just can't imagine, therefore, what God must look down on us and feel when he sees these kinds of fractious discussions and enmities being put in places they don't belong, and people drawing lines between us and them. Yeah, we're all God's children, and God's children ought to sort of look at each other as siblings. And sure, we're different, and we've got to admire that and celebrate that too. But the idea that we would take those differences and turn them into something much less honorable, those are our enemies now because they don't think the way we do, or they don't vote for the same candidates that I do. And it has become deeply troubling. You know, Rabbi, I had hoped that maybe one of the silver linings of this terrible COVID-19 crisis would be that it might draw us together, because here we are facing an unseen enemy that has already taken 200,000 lives, and we would feel that this is something that we ought to stand shoulder to shoulder and figure out how we can best address. And it grieves me that we don't seem to have seen that response. Yes, we have in some quarters, and some people have done amazing things to reach out to each other. but it certainly, even for simple things like, do you wear a mask or not? It suddenly becomes a contentious issue when it's really just a simple matter of public health. I'm hoping, and I'm talking to myself here too, because I'm capable of slipping into that same kind of, getting irritated or offended by somebody who doesn't quite say it the way I wanted to. I need to get over that. That's my chance for atonement here at Yom Kippur. But maybe as a nation, we could think about this, about how we, in the face of a real challenge that is taking lives and causing suffering, ought to set aside those terrible differences that don't need to be there and understand how we really are all God's children, and we got to do this together as God would call us to.
I gave a sermon just last week on Rosh Hashanah, just exactly about that when this pandemic first struck, for me, there was this fantasy. We saw it initially, that sense that the entire world was one, that this pandemic didn't distinguish between a poor grandmother in Italy and a movie star like Tom Hanks. It didn't distinguish. And we were witnessing this, the cheering from balconies all across the world. And somehow this pandemic that was shining a light on the oneness also has begun to shine a light on the cracks between us. And on one hand, I look at it and say, well, perhaps we needed to see that, perhaps that's an important light we needed to witness, that this pandemic, which has no consciousness, actually does know the difference between white and black, rich and poor, healthy and weak, young and old. It does know the difference. And we are the ones that have to bridge those distances and fill in those cracks. And God's waiting for us to do it. And it breaks my heart when people are not heeding your advice, when people are not heeding the advice of science and they're heeding crackpot ideas, and how important it is for us. As you well know, the rabbis say to save one life is to save the world. And I'm asking you to please just spell it out very clearly for everyone. What is it that we need to do our part to bridge those cracks by saving our own lives and saving the lives of our neighbors? What do you ask from us, from every soul in this nation and every soul in this world?
At one level, it's simple. At another level, it's incredibly complex. The simple one is we all hold in our hands the possible future of thousands of people around us by what we decide to do with this responsibility of trying to keep not just ourselves safe, but the people who are near us. We know that the most vulnerable people around us are the elderly, people with chronic illnesses, certainly those in certain communities, African Americans and Latinos, have been hit extremely hard by this terrible pandemic because of vulnerabilities that are based upon previous experiences and health disparities that this is shining a bright light on. And we should pay attention to that and grieve about the way in which our health system has been inequitable all along. But each of us has the chance to be somebody who stops that transmission, or somebody who actually plays a very serious role in conveying this terrible illness to those vulnerable people. It grieves me to see this having been turned into a political situation. Whether wearing a mask helps prevent spread of this disease is not a political question. It's a scientific question, and it is well established. And when you put on that mask when you leave your home, as I do, and as I hope all of you do as well, you are not protecting yourself all that much, a little bit perhaps, but mostly you're protecting other people. If you happen to be the person who is carrying that virus, unbeknownst to you, and it's diabolically the case for this virus, that something like 40% of the people who are infected do not know it. And yet they can be the ones to be the super spreader that takes down the lives of lots of other people. It happens over and over again. And this is particularly true for young people. And so for young people to say, well, it's not about me. Yes, it is. It's about you. It's about all of us. And unless you really are determined not to care about the lives of your grandparents or your neighbors down the street, then put the mask on and avoid the indoor gatherings, which is some of the most dangerous things that happen, and keep that 6-foot distance. We can all do that. That's not so hard. And the fact that it's become so contentious is just mind-boggling. On top of that, though, if we are people of faith, it's a time to pray. And it's a time to pray for those who are suffering, for those who are grieving, for ones they have lost. It's a time to pray for our healthcare providers who are out there on the front lines, putting themselves at risk, working incredible hours, and finding in many instances deeply discouraging that this is happening and we haven't figured out a way to stop it. And if I might, just because my job as the director of NIH is to oversee our entire nation's biomedical research enterprise, pray for the researchers too. They could use the blessing about what they're doing. They are working incredibly hard and feeling this sense, as I do every day, that every hour matters. If we can hurry up with the process of coming up with a treatment or a cure or a vaccine, we're going to save lives. And if we make a mistake and we lose a day or a week, the profound consequences hang very heavily on our shoulders. So pray for all of us.
I am praying, and I have a couple of more questions for you, but I promise I would love to bless you at the end of this.
That would be wonderful.
It would be so my honor. I also, by the way, I feel that it's on us, the young generation, it's on us if we haven't probably educated our young to have empathy. And I am praying that the young can understand and see that they bear a huge responsibility to look out for those who are susceptible to this virus. I mean, they're susceptible to the virus, but to take this seriously. And I just don't even want to, it's just bizarre to me, and it just breaks my heart. Timeline. We've been hearing all sorts of very conflicting ideas about visions for a timeline. And I'd love to hear from your perspective. We're entering a new Jewish year, where you see the timeline for getting a handle on this pandemic.
The reason that you're hearing a lot of different predictions is because nobody really knows.
I know, but I'd rather hear it from you than from politicians.
I'll do the best I can. It is a scientific enterprise that's never been undertaken at this level of intensity before, or with this sense of urgency. It's only January 10th that we first learned about the nature of this coronavirus and immediately began the process of designing a vaccine that within 48 hours. And here we are now in a timetable that is at least 4 times faster than has ever been attempted for a vaccine of this sort, with these large-scale so-called phase 3 trials going on for 3 different vaccines already and 3 more lining up to get started in the very near future. This is a good thing to have 6 different options, because we know the failure rate for vaccines can be substantial. But with 6 of them going along, I am cautiously optimistic at least one of those will turn out to be safe and effective. And I mean really safe and really effective, no rushing, no cutting corners. Let's be sure this is absolutely something that everybody looking at the information would say, okay, that's convincing. And I believe there's a reasonably good chance that we will have at least one of those in that space by December, potentially November. I don't think it's likely in October, just because we have many more steps to do before that could be really considered done. Now, once that decision is made that we have that safe and effective vaccine, then how do we get the doses out there? We have done something never done before, which is to manufacture tens of millions of doses of each of these vaccines, even before if we know they're going to work. And if they don't work, we'll have to throw those out. But if we get a vaccine that does work, then at least we have some doses for the most vulnerable people, which will be those people with high-risk conditions, the elderly, people with chronic disease, healthcare providers, first responders. For the rest of us who are maybe not considered so high risk, the doses will begin to appear, but it will be into 2021 through the spring and maybe even the late spring or the early summer before we have every American in a situation to get vaccinated, which means we will need to be patient and we will need to continue to practice these good measures to avoid spread of the disease for many months to come. And I know people are tired of it, and I know this is like, isn't it over yet? And unfortunately, the virus doesn't care that we're tired of it. It's still out there having quite a party with the human race, and we have to do our part to keep that party from getting any worse. We in the US are not in a good place right now. I had hoped that over the summer we would see the number of cases drop down very low, and so we could come into the fall maybe opening schools carefully and watching for the flu bugs that might be coming along. Instead, we're coming into the fall with almost 1,000 people a day dying, and we're not in a good place. And again, I can't say enough. It's up to all of us to figure out what we can do to try to take that down. Now, that all sounds discouraging. Again, as a person of faith, I am not discouraged. I'm inspired. I go to Psalm 46 when I'm having a bad day. God is our refuge and strength, a very present help in trouble. Well, we're in trouble, so we need that present help. And I count on God being there as my refuge and strength. And he doesn't let me down. I let myself down, but he doesn't let me
down. Thank you. I know the virus is having a party, and I'm just putting it out there to everyone viewing. Please don't have a party so we don't give the virus a party. And it has, we may be done with the virus, but it's not done with us. So I'm just asking everyone, please just count on your inner resources to be patient, just to be patient. I know we're fed up. I know we're angry. I know we're frustrated, but we have to be patient and we have to be cautious and we have to listen to what the experts are telling us. And for now, we have to assume that this is going to be many, many months. And we have to retain that level of caution. And from what I'm understanding, by next Yom Kippur, we can gather together. We will be able to do that. So let's just hold on to that thought, to that belief. And you've told us about Psalm 46, but I just wanted to just ask you again, you are working harder than any time of your life, and you're carrying an awesome burden for our entire nation and truly for our world. And you're carrying this mantle of leadership, which I know is heavy, but it's also a divine privilege. And I want to know what sustains you, inspires you, and gets you through and lifts you up.
Well, my faith is the rock that I am trying to stand on. I will tell you, I'm like most believers. There are days where it feels like I've got that rock under me and I can handle any storm. And there are days where the storm comes along and I feel like I got knocked off without really quite having had the strength I thought I did. I do count on those particular biblical messages to help me through. And Joshua 1:9 is another one. Be strong and courageous. Okay, that's what we've got to do. That's what I've got to do right now. But I won't deny the fact that I get discouraged and down and frustrated sometimes when it doesn't turn out the way I hoped it would, and particularly when the scientific efforts get all clouded over with a lot of other layers that aren't really that helpful when it comes to people who have conspiracy theories or political perspectives that are just getting in the way of our figuring out how to solve this problem. But part of my job also is to deal with that. And I am incredibly privileged to have this role, something I never could have dreamed of. And I do consider it a gift, even though it is at times a heavy burden.
We are also honored that you are in this position and that you are sustaining us with truth, with science, with curiosity, and disseminating messages that will save lives. I was going to say on a lighter note, but I actually don't think it's a light note. I think it's a very serious thing that, when Moses and the children of Israel passed through the Red Sea and they got to the other side, they didn't speak words of praise. They sang a song. In Hebrew, Az Yashir Moshe. They sang a song. And the rabbis say, I love this quote, you know, there are 10 levels of prayer, and above them is song. And we just had spoken for just a moment before we began this, that we both share this deep love for music and guitar. And I just want to know, what does music mean to you? And I love that you composed a song of praise for the incredible treatment for CF, for cystic fibrosis. And I'm praying for the day that you compose a song for the end to this pandemic. But what does prayer mean to you as the language, as one of the languages of the soul? What does song mean to you?
I'm glad you brought it up, Rabbi, because I do think this is a way that we can reach out and touch the hem of the garment. We can have this sense of connection to the spiritual through song. It goes deeply into who we are. When I'm having a really tough day, and there are plenty of those, I'm working from home because it's a safe place to be. But that means only 20 steps away from here is my guitar and my baby grand piano. And it never fails that if I'm looking for a way to get grounded again, to get back on track, to have some sense of purpose and even joy, music is the place that I go to. Maybe it's just improvising some tune that came into my head, or maybe it's a hymn that I'm particularly fond of that has touched me at other times and I need it to touch me now. And maybe it's just the pure joy of having the amazing combination of words and music that takes you in a place you couldn't go. That's what song is all about. I miss the corporate opportunity of singing, which meant a lot to me. I'm in a rock and roll band, and I'm also one of those who loves to throw a music party in my own home and invite 40 or 50 people who just like to sing. And I miss that, and I will really, really love it when we can get back together again. But even now, by whatever means, music does have this luminous quality that gives me a chance when things seem awfully dark and foreboding to realize that that's not really the case, that God is still in charge and God can figure out a way to help us through this if we can just look closely at the light. And sometimes the music gets me there.
You know, I've been thinking as you're speaking of David's harp, David's lyre. And there's a very famous medieval poem by Yehuda Halevi, who is a brilliant philosopher and poet. And he wrote in this poem of praise, he says to God, for all your songs, let me be your harp. And I think I wanted to maybe end with that, just that we can be God's harp. And I thank you for allowing God to play you. And I pray that God will play all of us, that we'll see that God can work through us so that we can share God's song in the world. And I thank you for that. I thank you for opening yourself to us, but for opening yourself up to God so that God can play you, that God can pray you. And I would love to bless you if that would be all right.
I would be so honored if you would do that, and bless all those who are toiling in the scientific fields at the moment, trying to come up with the answers we all need.
God, watch over Dr. Francis Collins and all of his colleagues who are researching to find a cure to this pandemic, which we pray and hope and believe is at hand. And watch over every soul who is in the front lines of this battle, doctors, nurses, PAs, EMTs, everyone who's in the front lines of this battle, risking their lives to save lives. And God, open the eyes of everyone so that we can all take care of each other and take care of ourselves to save lives. God, give us the strength, the endurance, the compassion, the patience, the empathy to save lives. And Dr. Collins, I bless you with the priestly blessing. Yivarechecha Adonai v'yishmerecha, Ya'er Adonai panav elecha v'chuneka, Yisa Adonai panav elecha v'yasem lecha shalom. May God bless you and protect you. May God's very light be on you, shining through you, filling you with grace. And may God's very presence be with you, filling you, granting you with peace and health and strength and courage.
Thank you. Thank you,
God bless
Rabbi.
you.
Blessings on you and what you're doing for this one Yom Kippur. We are going to get through this with God's help.
We will. And I thank you for joining us and taking time out of your awesome responsibilities to join us on this day of awe.
And a joy.
Thank you.